3 of Behind the Headlines. This is the podcast where we go beyond the bylines and into the lives of the women shaping our world through journalism. In a media landscape that still too often sidelines women's voices, we are here to center them, to listen deeply, to ask better questions, and to explore the stories behind the stories. From conflict zones to newsrooms, from investigative desk to grassroots reporting. This season continues our mission, amplifying the women challenging narratives, holding power to account, and redefining what journalism looks like. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Behind the Headlines, the podcast where we explore the missing narratives of women journalists. And I'm really happy to have you all joining me today live for what feels like a very special conversation. This episode is a moment for all of us to pause and reflect. Over the past 3 to 5 years, journalism and the world around it has shifted dramatically. We've seen progress, but also pushback. Conversations around gender equality, diversity, inclusion, and human rights have gained visibility, but they've also faced growing resistance. So today we are asking, what does all this mean for us as journalists, as storytellers, as people working within the media? Where do we still find space for underrepresented voices, for younger generation, for new ideas? Where do we find joy and meaning and hope in an industry that is constantly evolving at a time under pressure? And most importantly, what kind of media landscape are we helping to build for the future? And I'm also very excited for today because I'm here with two very special guests who have been part of the very first series of Behind the Headlines, and they came back today to help me explore how their life and their career as well evolved and expanded in these past few years. So I'm happy to introduce you to Luba Kassova, a researcher, journalist, and co-founder of the audience strategy consultancy ACAS, and Camilla Byk, co-founder of Podium.me, a platform dedicated to amplify young voices and creating pathway into journalism for the next generation. Welcome, Luba and Camilla.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
So I want to ask you an icebreaking question, just to start gently and get into the conversation. So 3 years have passed since we first met, and you shared your stories on the very first series of Behind the Headlines. Where are you both now in your careers, and is there a particular highlight or wow moment that you would like to share with us today?
Well, I never thought that I'd be recording an audio drama and making all the sound effects. So that was a highlight, a recent one, which I can talk about a bit more in the interview. But I started out as a documentary producer, and I love the way that you can just kind of morph into something else. So that was my highlight moment.
Nice, super exciting. How about you, Luba?
I'm sure we'll talk more about this, but my career is very much what we call portfolio career. Long form journalism and writing has really taken front stage for me, which I'm very excited about. But I did think what would be my highlights, and I definitely have one. Which is a article I wrote for The Guardian called Tech Bros Need to Realize Deepfake Porn Ruins Lives. It was in late 2023, and one of the impacts is that it was extensively quoted, parts of the article, in hearings on AI Abuse Act in the Californian Senate, and that act has now actually been ratified, and so I'm extremely proud of this one.
It's really important to see when journalists as well can also affect policy and what can lead to actual changes. So really, really proud for this, for you, Luba. Thank you so much again for sharing. And since I have you, and you already touched briefly on the fact that you changed your career in the past few years and you're focusing on long form writing. Do you want to share with us how this shift has happened, where this decision has come from, and how has shaped you?
Oh, by all means. So the decision came largely out of a midlife crisis, and it felt that I had no choice but to start writing a lot more regularly because the alternative to that, I realized, would be depression. And I chose expression. And in fact, Edith Eger, an amazing Holocaust survivor who's written many books, talks about expression being the opposite of depression. And I really feel that with my life choice 6 years ago, where I felt I had no choice but to start writing. And I have always adored journalism. I started working more actively in journalism in 2009, as I was I headed up the audiences team for BBC News, and fell in love with journalism then. And so it felt like something I really needed to do. At the moment, I do the freelance journalism. I write a lot on Substack, and I also am an active part of the consultancy that Richard and I co-founded, which is the source of income really that supports my journalism.
We're gonna come back to the Substack a little bit later. But Camilla, you mentioned about as well what you've done with the drama production, and I'd be interested as well to know how has Podium.me evolved in the past few years. Is there any big milestone you want to share with us? Any even like, I don't know, future plan? Because I know you are a super creative person, and there is always something new happening with you. So I'm curious to know where are we right now?
So we're a very responsive organization, and whatever the young people bring to me as an idea, I try to help make it happen, as long as it's vaguely connected with audio. And recently, in the last 6 years, we've been moving into other areas of storytelling. And we did a series of 5 audio plays set during COVID, which we then broadcast on 14 regional stations around the UK, and had small groups, reviewing the plays and giving feedback on air. And that was incredibly exciting. And then I went and did an assembly at Global Academy in West London. And at the end of it, one of the students came up to me and said, "Can I pitch an idea to you? I've written a sitcom." And I said, "Sure." I mean, I wasn't there to talk about drama at all, but it was so compelling that I said, "Let's make this happen." And so last Saturday, we had cast and found a whole crew. I had 14 young people, all new to each other, didn't know each other, as a team working on this new sitcom, which is coming out soon. And it just shows how, if you are responsive to people's ideas, amazing things can happen. People often say, "What's your strategy at Podium.me?" And I say, just raising the voices of young people and giving them a platform. And whatever that platform looks like, it's always exciting. And I think that's why I still love my job, because I never quite know what's coming next. And as you say, I'm a creative person, so I enjoy bouncing ideas around with people. And this has been the result so far.
This is really inspiring, first of all, for all of us here. When the sitcom is out, share the link with us, share where we can watch it, because I'm super curious to see what you produce with these young people. And I still remember something that we said on the very first episode I recorded with you, on how to always be open and listening to what the new generation, what the young people, and the way they want to express and share their stories, rather than actually telling them, like, this is what I would like you to write about, because that's the way, that's the best way for the content to come out and to shape in a way that actually resonates, firstly with them, but also with the audience, that you talk to. So I can see that you actively listening, and it's really important, as well as journalism is evolving, platforms are changing, and the way we do storytelling, it needs to adapt to, it needs to be agile to this new landscape. And on this, I actually want to bring up the topic of Substack, because for so many journalists, Substack now is becoming an outlet, a safe place as well, where to share more long essay. And I also would like to say, like, a more niche journalism that perhaps doesn't find space on mainstream media. And I know that Luba, you launched your Substack, Luba Scope, which is a social commentary with art and facts. So tell me a little bit more how this adventure is going. Why Substack? And yeah, like share any advice as well with all the young people connected with us today that might decided to embrace this journey too.
Of course. So my journey with Substack started very recently in June last year, but it was I was carrying the idea for a while, and the practical reason for why I launched it is because I got a lot of advice that for authors who want to be published, it's really important to have a voice on Substack because that's where editors and agents are. And on a personal note, I was really, really craving a space where I would come up with an idea and just write about it in a way that I want to write about it. I can write longer pieces. They don't need to be heavily edited. And I absolutely love that aspect of being on Substack too. It's been a very rewarding journey, and I really recommend it to anyone who loves writing. I've only been there since June, but I do feel as if it's rewiring my brain. I feel I'm more eloquent because I write so much more and so much more regularly. And it kind of offsets moments of perimenopausal brain where I can't find my words. It actually helps me find my words easier just because I'm writing so much more regularly.
I recommend everyone, if you are not, to subscribe to Luba Substack. It's really interesting, and I really like what you write, and I think it's a good tool as well that young people should start exploring even more. I'm wondering if this also gave you a little bit of more flexibility as well with the topic and the story you published that perhaps you did not find on mainstream media when pitching to editors, and if this has changed as well, I don't know, your flow of ideas and topic you covers and stories you share.
Um, So it absolutely gives me a lot more flexibility, and I can write about the topics that I want to write about. And in this world of crazy geopolitical pressure that we're all enduring, I am able to say, okay, I'm going to focus on 4 topics this year, of which gender and equality generally, of course, will be always forefront, but I've also added the topic of democracy and authoritarianism because I feel so strongly coming from a communist, ex-communist society. I feel incredibly passionate about preserving democracy. I also want to write about Gen Z, and I do in the context of how to be resilient in a world that my generation and those before me completely cocked up for young people. So these are 3 areas that are really important to me, and also current affairs. So now with Substack, I'm like, I'm gonna focus on this, and I don't need to necessarily deviate from that because of for whatever reason. So yeah, it gives me a lot of flexibility, and it helps me home in on topics in a way that you don't have time when you're writing articles uh, for uh, um, for mainstream media. But I need to say this, I would never remotely, for now, because I'm so small, I would never have the impact that I just started off with. When you ask what's my proud moment, it's only when you're published in publications like the Guardian or Fortune you can have that type of impact. So it's really important to be clear what it is you want to achieve for yourself, for the world, and then decide what compromises you need to make to achieve these things.
Thank you, Luba, for sharing. I think this was a very important point as well to make. And Camilla, on your side, working with young people, you already mentioned that, for example, this they reach out to you, proposing you an idea for a sitcom. So have you noticed in the past years also a change of platform for young people that they want to use when practicing journalism, storytelling?
Do you mean in terms of which platforms they want to publish their work on?
Yeah, platform and also outlet and shape, the shape that they want to give to their stories. Have you noticed like big changes, or perhaps maybe the format has stayed the same in the past few years, and just like maybe the story have changed?
I think the stories have definitely changed, and I'm getting much more what I would call academic pitches, where people want to explore a topic like AI or the effect of social media on young people, or do social experiments. One young journalist has just pitched an idea to basically encourage some of his friends to give up their phones or give up their social media for a month and to record their responses before and after and during, and he's finding it difficult to recruit people to do it because it's difficult to step away. So I think there's a lot more analysis going on, slightly more serious topics, so a bit less of the frivolous stuff that we used to get. So I want there always to be a balance, but at the end of the day, it's whatever you're passionate about. I always say, what are the questions you want to ask, or who are the people you're hanging out with that you want to help tell their story? And I'm constantly surprised by what comes up.
And have you noticed any difference in the demographic that you reach with this change of pace, and also change of format and stories as well, that the young people are working with Podium present and then you publish?
Not really. I mean, I've always had a very diverse group of people to work with. And because we have a no selection, no rejection policy, so every young person that comes to us will be given something to make or do, or some kind of input, so, or join a team. And so as a result, we don't choose who the voices are. They are self-selecting. And I find that a great way to work because it takes the pressure off me. I can say yes to everything, and if people don't manage to do it, that's on them. It's not my responsibility to make it happen. So I'd say, we're getting a lot of young people coming to us with serious ideas, but then the sitcom was such a lovely example of a frivolous idea, but that needs to be approached seriously and responsibly, and with all the production values that we've always had. So I think you can do both.
And a question that I have for both, like if we look at the world around us and what has happened on a societal and political level in the past few years, have you noticed on your experience and the work you do some big shift, and how have this shift impacted your work and the way also you show up in the journalism space?
Yes, of course. I mean, it's had profound impact on a personal level. Basically, one of the things that is very hard to deal with at the moment is the amount of pressure that different events, wars, and conflicts are creating that we have to maintain. And that means it's imperative to step away from the news, even if you're a journalist. In fact, especially if you're a journalist, because otherwise we really risk collapsing. Then the enshittification of the internet and the amount of stuff you need to feel frustrated by coming across, having to deal with the fact that you no longer know what's real because it could be AI produced, and tech companies don't take responsibility. That also creates a big pressure. There is, from an effectiveness perspective, a real need, in my view, to be disciplined and to, as I said before, I've decided this year I'm going to write about 4 topics. And as much as the shit is hitting the fan everywhere, I have to stay with these topics, because otherwise you just lose your heart and soul everywhere and you can't have impact anywhere. So that's another way, just being disciplined, protecting yourself, being more conscious, and training yourself to remain hopeful even when there doesn't seem to be much hope around, is really important. And I really, I'm learning. I mean, I am a novice, but I really want to do well in that.
I agree with you about the hope point. And I was at an event for Bristol undergraduates last night, and hearing about the kind of projects that they're working on, the studies they're doing, the ambitions they have for their careers. And I was encouraging them, saying, what you're doing is real. and nobody can take that away from you. And if you read the headlines about young people, it's all doom and gloom. It's no jobs, not in education, employment, or training. And the more they tell those stories, the more that impacts a young person's aspirations. And so I said, please step away from the news. You look at what you're doing around you, look at what your peer group are doing, encourage each other, lift each other up, and then you will make it happen, and it will happen. So you can create a narrative for yourself that doesn't need to be influenced by statistics, because at the end of the day, statistics only reflect the current situation. They can't predict into the future, so you can always change that statistic. So I'm very keen to get people, as journalists particularly, to look around them at what's going on in real life rather than getting stuck behind a screen, because we don't know what's real and what's not. But if you're sitting on the bus and you hear a conversation next to you, I can guarantee you that is real. And that's where I get my stories, on the street, just listening to people.
I'm curious to understand also from both of you the take that you have on the role of emotions in journalism and in storytelling. And I want to start with you, Luba. You wrote an article, 21st Century Journalist Needs Emotion to Survive. And in this article, you argue that emotions are essential for engaging audience in a tech-driven world. And, you already also touched on like how news can also make us feel very, very, they can affect us emotionally a lot. So how do you see this principle shaping the future of journalism?
And I just to clarify, my argument about emotions was definitely that emotions are part of our decision making. Almost tech is irrelevant, but they really are part of our decision making, and I don't think journalism understands that. And because it doesn't pay attention, it's allowing audiences to drift because they're so despondent and discouraged and hopeless, but no one's noticing that, and no one's helping them to feel otherwise, that they go. So the way I see the future of journalism is not to think of stories just in terms of story arcs, but emotions arc, and particularly what emotions do we want to leave audiences on? Obviously, there are tragedies happening, and I'm not advocating for Pollyanna-ish world at all, but I'm saying, how can we produce responsible journalism that leaves audiences on positively activating emotions, or at the very least empowered, where you're telling them what potential solutions are, or where they can seek help if you're reflecting a problem that they may have. So you leave them empowered. So thinking in terms of story arc, emotions arc, I think is really, really important. And another question that is very, very urgent for us to answer in journalism is, how do you produce responsible journalism in the era of anxiety and fear? What does that look like? Because it is people feeling anxious. We're all feeling more anxious than we felt in the 90s or 2000. How do you produce journalism that sustains people, keeps them alive, frankly, and emotionally responsive? I think that's the future, asking ourselves those questions.
I heard a very good interview with Katja Adler, who's the BBC European correspondent, and she was talking about how she got into journalism. And she said as a child, she would watch the news with her parents and be very moved by news broadcasting. And she felt bad about stories that were happening in the rest of the world, but she was also fascinated by it. And I think her response to news is all of our responses. We feel bad about things that we can do nothing about, that we are powerless to do anything about. And, that's on sort of big scale news. But the kind of stories that I'm keen to tell, they have fact at their center, but because they're personal to the young person who's pitched it, they are emotional by the fact that they are personal. So it's very different from being a correspondent to cover all the stories in Europe. If you're talking about something that affects you, you're going to draw people in naturally. Nobody can argue with your fact, your personal truth. So I think we need to be careful with emotions, because a lot of podcasts might use music or long silences or dramatic pauses to kind of invoke emotion in the listener. And I think you can be quite manipulative, and I'm very keen not to do that, but to let the facts and the voice speak for itself. So I tend to be quite harsh on anything that's going to manipulate the emotions and try and just put people in a difficult position, because I think our emotions are pretty exhausted at the moment. Like you say, Luba, we're anxious, and so just having a conversation is better than having a very curated sort of emotional roller coaster, which is what some broadcasts try to do.
And I completely agree with you that manipulating emotions would be really wrong. But I think, and I addressed that in the article that I wrote, which the research shows that as soon as you mention emotions to journalism, they make that shortcut to manipulation, because we're really trained to be rational and to play with the facts. But the truth of the matter is, as human beings, and that's what neuroscience is telling us, emotions actually give us direction and guidance, which facts to believe in and which facts not to believe in. So whether we like it or not, we will feel emotions. So I think it's important to engage, but as you say, to do it responsibly, not in a manipulative way, but in a responsible way. And I guess, of course, you might say, but what does that look like? And we can go on forever. But I think acknowledging the fact that we are emotional beings is very important for journalism.
Definitely. And I think that's sort of what Katia was saying is, you have to keep your emotions in when you're broadcasting for the nation. But her original sort of reason for becoming a journalist was due to her emotions. And so you have to hold those two things in tension, staying impartial, but allowing people to have a response. Yeah.
And actually, if I may say one more thing, I completely agree with you and your approach around hooking your stories on facts, but then letting the story speak for itself. What we did during COVID, one of the reports that we wrote exposed the fact that vast majority of COVID-related coverage was facts, pure facts, but the stories that led to policy change were those which zoned into human beings and how they were impacted. So bringing the two together is by far the best journalism we could ever produce, because it's human stories that will change and make us do something, but facts are really important to box them in a way that's not manipulative, but actually realistic.
I agree completely with everything you said, and I think it's also good that we have so many young people in the room today to listen to this conversation, because it's at the end of the day they are the future as well of the industry, and I'm also wondering, like, what kind of future are we preparing for them, and what kind of industry are we leaving behind for them? So maybe this was not in my question, but I want to pick your brain on this.
I think the industry is very resilient. I think there are extraordinary innovations that people are coming up with in terms of journalism, in terms of access to stories. I mean, the marketplace is very crowded. That's one of the problems, is how do we educate young people? And I don't mean that in a patronizing way, because they can educate me, but how do we educate ourselves in terms of filtering the rubbish from the truth? I think that's really challenging. But when people start by looking at their local area and then kind of building out from your own contacts and going further and further, then if you're linked to the story in some way, I think that really helps, especially with reporting from other countries. I would always advocate for someone from that region to be doing the reporting rather than an outsider's view. But I think it's an exciting time. I think the platforms are amazing, and the structures are constantly changing. So I don't know what you think, Luba.
I agree with you about the fact that the industry is very resilient. I wish I was as positive as you, and I thought it's full of opportunity. I think journalists are under enormous amount of pressure, even insofar as their safety, their jobs, their self-expression. They're attacked as part of the far right's concerted effort to silence journalism. So I don't think it's an easy time to enter journalism. And as you said, Camilla, earlier, there is no way for any of us to predict what the future holds. So in that sense, Ilaria, I would like to reframe your question into what I would like future of journalism to look like. And I would like us to leave an industry that's anchored in compassion and anchored around the human beings rather than the headlines. So looking after the journalists, the leaders, the sources, and the outcomes, the audiences.
Let's schedule a call in, like, I don't know, 10 years time now, to see another podcast recording, to see and to ask all the young journalists that are here with us today, like, if actually this dream turned out to be the reality for them. I saw already there is a little bit of movement in the chat with questions, so I do have some more questions on my side, but I wanted to open to the audience if you let me.
A couple questions in the chat already. I'll read those ones out, and then I also have a question that I will do after at the end. So both of these were Ruona's questions. This first one's for Luba, which is, I'm thinking of having an individual Substack. How does Luba fit in the time to write daily with other writing work?
Great question. Well, what's discipline is really important, Rona, and I'm afraid your weekends are no longer going to be just chilling, if they ever were. But I think realistically, one of those days you will probably be writing or researching what you're going to write. Basically, your days extend. But because I love it so much, I generally don't mind. Having said that, I did, so when I started my Substack Lubascope, I was doing a weekly, I was writing a weekly essay for between June and end of last year. I found that this was so punishing, and I found myself feeling so exhausted that I've now scaled back to twice a month, and that works much, much better.
And then the next one, which is for Camilla, is how is AI influencing the production and particularly the interview process? In terms of you wanting authenticity, but people tend to use AI for interviews, scripts, etc. I'm curious about how you have encountered and deal with AI use as you tell your authentic stories.
Well, I may be terribly naive or AI has improved, but I am not seeing this happening. And that might be because the way I teach interview technique is about following the tangent. So the interviewer will have an idea of how they want to start an interview, but it's not their job to read out their 5 questions in sequence, no matter what the answers are, and next and next. It's their job to follow where the interviewee is going. And those are the kind of stories that we want to tell. So we're not hard hitting, doorstepping journalists, with a commissioning editor saying you have to get this story in this particular angle. We're much more about saying this is a platform. We invite you interviewee onto the platform. We want to hear what you've got to say, and we want to follow you and take your lead. So AI, as far as I know, if you're in a live interview, can't do that for you because it wouldn't be able to keep up. So hopefully we will continue doing it with those strategies. And not that AI is bad, it can be used as a tool, but I think it would take out the human nature of listening to somebody and responding in real time.
I'll do my question. So this is for Luba, in your Missing Perspectives report, there's a lot about gaps in women's representation and inclusion, obviously in the news. What findings do you think are the most important for the industry and society to know about and to address at the moment?
Oh, I really love this question. And actually, I have an answer for it. Like, typically, if you'd asked me this question 3 years ago, I would say there isn't one thing that the industry should do, because there is a whole news value chain and you need to impact every part of it for change to be sustained. But the backlash that we're seeing in society against equality is really ricocheting on to journalism. And what's happening is that we're reverting back to basics where representation is getting much worse. So I would advocate for going back to basics and just counting what's happening at the moment. And it's driven by US is the whole narrative, the gender lens of trying to explain a problem through a lens of gender difference, that's gone. And with that goes our opportunity to see how male dominated the industry is. Let me give you an example. So Richard and I very recently, looked at the Oscars, the representation of women in the Oscars. And we waited for 4 days to see what media would, mainstream news media would report about the Oscars. And it was amazing, about women doing very well, defying ageism through their awards, or obviously the outfits, the perennial question, whose outfit was better. Jessie Buckley's, and we absolutely adore her wonderful speech giving credence to mothers. But what we didn't hear is, or read, is the fact that women account for 28% of the non-gendered role in the Oscars. That's not a reason to celebrate, and it's not a frame at all that news is covering. Therefore, because of the pro-female publicity in the news and the fact that very high-profile women who we love, like Jessie Buckley, take so much space, we end up thinking that it's very equitable, but it isn't actually. And women are very much on the margins of movie making. And so I would advocate count, go back to basics. Let's count, just so that we can record history. What's happening? Where are women? And that would make a real difference. And in that sense, we recently published a report called The Missing Women in Global Power, and we're looking at 14 sectors and how marginalized women are in those sectors, because we felt compelled to tell that story, just in case it disappears from history.
And what advice would you give to a young journalist?
One of the things I'm noticing is the enormous capacity for multi-skilling amongst the current generation coming out of university. So they are equipped with so many skills, whether it's video, audio, just being able to present things, social media skills. What they're wanting, and I sometimes think, oh, we need to do a lot more about this, is the networking skills, the confidence skills, the ability to approach somebody on LinkedIn or in real life, and to know that you have a space at the table. If you have more than a space at the table, you are welcome and being invited into the table. And I think a lot of young people don't realize that until it actually happens. And so I see a lot of my role as meeting people in person, and I'll often meet someone for a chat, have a coffee, spend an hour with them, hear about, what makes them tick, and then say, right, do you want to meet this person, or should we go to this event together and I can introduce you to them? And just giving that leg up. And it's a sort of type of mentoring that has got a bit lost. There's lots of official mentoring out there, but I think the unofficial mentoring, where you're just looking around, who's out there, who's in the same space as you that just needs a leg up. So that's what I would say, is be present. Go to events, be there in person. Be there online as well, but it's not the same.
Oh, I really, really love every word you've said, Camilla, and I just wish you could talk to every young person and convey what you just said. What I could add to this is that we live in very uncertain times. As we know, no one knows the future. But call me naive, but what I think will really help young people find their place in journalism is to keep the passion for the craft, the competence that they have, and their humanity. Protect your humanity, your emotions, be in your body, because the combination of your passion, competence, and humanity are always gonna help you find your place in the working world, I believe. And another thing that I want to add is, I'm actually getting emotional. It's okay. We'll leave it at that for now. But that is kind of my advice to this, for young people.
I had a similar point to your question you gave us earlier about how do we create inclusive, diverse and representative workspaces and newsrooms. And it was about the passion. I was saying, don't hire for quotas, hire for passion. And there'll always be a diverse set of people in your applicant list. And when you actually question them and find out what it is that makes them tick, if you hire for passion, you will guarantee a diverse, representative and inclusive workforce, is my opinion.
And actually, you've sparked me off with another thought, which is quite a practical advice. If when you write your applications for jobs, always write in your covering letters what it is you can do for the company where you're applying, not what it is the company can do for you and why you're interested in a job. When I was working as head of audiences and generally in the corporate world and hiring, the covering letters that really stood out for me were those that were generous outward, as in, this is what I want to do for you. But so often young people seem to, there were so many CVs, not CVs, but covering letters, which were also about, oh, what I want to get out of this job. So be more outward, more generous, and then you'll find that the world is going to be generous back.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. I think there is another question.
Yeah, I was going to say we've got one more question in the chat from Rachel. It's for Camilla. I love what you said earlier about the industry being resilient. I want to ask, on the hardest days in journalism, what reminds you that journalism still matters?
Well, I try to focus on stories that have a long shelf life, and I don't cover stories that, happened this morning. And there's a point behind that, because I think if you can tell a story in a podcast form that is still relevant 5 years later and still gives that person a voice, and Rachel will know what I'm talking about, making a story that will still be even historically relevant, even if it's not current, is very, very valuable. And so that's what keeps me going in journalism, because I don't feel that the stories I help to tell are, yesterday's chip paper or today's, whatever the phrase is, that this was in the days when people wrapped their fish and chips in newspaper. Used to talk about, today's story is tomorrow's chip paper. That's the one. But I don't treat it like that. I say that today's story is also next year's story, and it's also a story in 10 years' time. And like you said, Luba, you're recording the data so that it is part of history. So for me, journalism is much bigger than today's version of the news. You're part of a long line of people who've stood in the gap of history and written it down and made it concrete. So that's what was the question? That's what reminds me that journalism matters, because it's always mattered and it always will matter. And you're just a little part of it, helping those stories to be told and not forgotten.
We've got another question. You both mentioned finding inspiration all around, and Camilla, you said about finding stories on the streets, I believe. In time that everything is about more and more, bigger, more explosive and loud, what is your message to young people that might be intimidated by a world that is behaving often in this way?
Ignore the people that you don't like their approach. Just step away from it. There's a lot, you're right, there's a lot of shouting and there's a lot of divisiveness and sort of hate and trolling and all that stuff, but you do have the ability to step away from it, and to write things that are actually resonating with others. I write a lot of poetry, and I don't publish anything, and I never say never, but for me, poetry needs to be performed in a space, whether it's just to one person, shared, because it's something real and it's a quiet revolution. I don't need a great big platform, because I believe in seeing people's responses in person. So I hear you, and I think you can be overwhelmed by the explosive stuff, but you can just switch that off and say, I'm going to make this in a smaller way and actually have a real audience that I know who they are and I can connect and hear their feedback.
And I guess my advice is to zone in the noise by really focusing on listening to one person. I think we're generally becoming worse and worse at listening to each other, which is adding to the divisiveness. And I would say just really listen to somebody, which is the biggest gift. Attention is the biggest gift we can give each other. And by doing that, you ground yourself, and then a great story will come out of it, because you've really honed into one person rather than focused on the noise.
Thank you for this beautiful last question, because it leads me very well to the last one I want to ask you. And where do you still find joy, hope, and inspiration.
I had an extraordinary encounter recently. One of my young journalists who made a series of podcasts during COVID when he was in his sixth form years and, stuck at home, unable to go to college. And recently he got in contact via LinkedIn and said, I'm organising a connections and cocktails evening for everyone my age. We're all about 23, 24, starting out in our careers. Will you come and be on the panel talking about non-linear careers or portfolio careers? And I could not have been prouder to go to this event, which one of my students was putting on at his workplace and inviting all of his friends. And so that gives me so much joy and so much hope. Like, my job is done for him, it's done. We've given him the platform, and hooray, well done, Cameron. And there are many hundreds more who have similar stories that I have known sort of for the past, I've been doing this for 15 years. And so they're all growing up and doing their thing. So the joy is pretty much endless, because there'll always be another young person to help along the way.
Oh, I completely agree with you about the joy of connecting with young people, and that's where I get my biggest inspiration from. And I just want to give two examples. One is I've recently written an article which I hope will be soon published by Fortune, and it's about the analog movement that gaining momentum, and it's driven by Gen Z, who are saying, we don't want to be imprisoned by social media anymore. They're exiting. There are businesses thriving around detoxing. I mean, it's incredible how brave they are, unlike the rest of us, who I've just recently realized, I think our generation is equally addicted to phones and social media, but we're projecting it out on our kids, and we want them to change, but we're not doing much about it ourselves. So that's really wonderful. And then as a researcher, I have to mention some data that actually Richard shared with me recently. It's from US. And the situation in US is very, very tough for many people, increasingly so. And yet an economist, a YouGov survey has does this incredible, asks this incredible question, which I will read out. It's a big, beautiful world, mostly full of good people, and we must find a way to embrace each other and not allow ourselves to become isolated. And it's a statement, whether you agree or disagree. And of course, young people 18 to 29s are most likely than any other group to agree. In fact, 67% of them agree with that statement. And I find that incredibly positive, that young people should be so optimistic and believe in the goodness of people. And I genuinely think that in times of uncertainty and anxiety, what will help us move forward are two things. One, to believe in basic goodness of people, and two, to believe that suffering is temporary. No suffering is endless, and this will get us through to wherever we're going. Hopefully, the pendulum will swing backwards and we'll move in the right direction.
What a beautiful way to finish this conversation. I want to thank you both, Luba and Camilla, for today. This has been inspiring, and I'm so glad we had the time to catch up on what's happening behind the headlines, and to, I hope maybe we can do definitely this in another 3 to 5 years, because we are all evolving with our stories, with the ideas, with the challenges. So I think it's great if we just take some time as well to celebrate it together in a moment like this. So thank you so much again for being with us today.
It's been joyful for me. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you,
Thank you, Camilla. And thank you to everyone who decided to spend their Friday evening with us. And if there is anyone who is also celebrating Eid in the call today, Eid Mubarak to all of you. And I hope you're going to have a nice evening and continuation of your weekend. Behind the Headlines, it's all about amplifying the voices of women in journalism and exploring the stories that often go untold. If you have enjoyed today's conversation, follow us on social media, subscribe to the podcast, and join the When Power Circle. Be part of the community that's changing the face of journalism, one story at a time.
I am your host, Ilaria Biancacci. Till the next time.